what matchmaking services do is they take all sorts of data from all their users, try to make sense of that data, and then connect these users based off of that data. Right? So this data can be all sorts of things. It could be your demographics, like where you live, what the color of your hair is, color of your eyes, or also like, what your preferences, so things that you like, so like certain kinds of movies or technology, or it could start to take those kinds of things and make a match based off of that, just with a big group of people. But I've come to find, and I'm sure you have it as well, is that just because you might like the same movie as somebody else doesn't mean that you're going to be friends with that person, or doesn't mean that you're going to want to work with that person, or doesn't mean that you're going to want to date that person. So these matchmakers actually have to get a little bit deeper into understanding the psychology or like the thoughts of this person on a whole nother level. So for us to do that, we're going to introduce this algorithm that's going to be taking a bunch of questions. So we're going to ask questions about our users, make sense of those questions with an algorithm, which we'll explain what all that is once we get there. And then we're going to kind of give results or what we think might be a good fit for this particular user. Now, the important part here for a service that you would want to build is to gather this data and try to make better ways of gathering the data. And then from there, you can make sense of the data. Now, I want to talk about a company that has a ton of data and uses that data all the time to make better sense of their users and make a better service as a result. And that is Uber. Uber is this car hailing service that you can basically have somebody come pick you up in their own car and drive you somewhere. And if you think about it, Uber has so many people doing this stuff that they have to make sense of this data. But Uber's service itself has been solid, so they can actually spend a lot more time on figuring out how to actually make sense of that data. So our goal here is to actually get data as much as possible and make as much sense of it as we can, and then improve upon both of those things on our service in the long run. Now for us, that's going to be a little bit outside the context of this class, but for you, if you were to actually launch this project, you could start making sense of the data more and working with higher, more complicated mathematical models, or working with people that understand that more, than to actually build on top of your matchmaker service. Cool. So that's where we're going. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's actually jump into building this. So we talked about it abstractly. Let's actually jump into actually doing it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a model that's specifically for questions. So I want to actually build something for questions. So I'm going to make an app specifically for questions. Now, if you look back in our old project, we have an app in here for newsletter, right? So all of this was doing was taking a model and it was grabbing emails and their username or their full name, and it's going to create the database of all this stuff. Very, very simple. But what we want to do is actually create one that is for questions. So let's go ahead and go into our Matchmaker project, and I'll do python manage.py, start app questions. So this is going to be the whole app. It's going to be called questions. So this app itself is going to be our questions, and we'll also have it as our answers too. But questions are the main part of it, right? The answers are part of a question, so the answers rely on a question itself. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and open up our models, and we're just going to create a question. So I'll just say class question, and it's going to be models.model. So this is going to be a question, and the question itself, we're probably going to want to have some question text, and then, what else do we really need? Whether or not it's active, so a Boolean value maybe, so whether we want this to be shown on the site or not, like if it's a draft or something, so you could also say if it's a draft, because draft and active might not necessarily be the same thing, and we can also see maybe when we put it in, so a timestamp, so figuring out the data when it was actually put in. And that might be all we want, right? So we want the text for the question, so what the actual question is going to be. We want whether or not it's active, and then we want a draft, right? Whether or not it's a draft, and then we want our timestamp. All right, so that's when I'll leave it now. We might improve it later, but for now, this is good. So I'll do models.char field, and better yet, I'll do text field. So this is going to give us the text field. And then for active, I'll do models.boolean field, so a true or false value. And I'll say default equals to true, right? That should make sense, because by default, if we create a question, it should be true. And draft, by default, is also going to be a Boolean value, but by default, it's going to be false, right? By default, I'm going to just say that it's not in draft mode. Now, this is completely up to you because maybe you don't want it to publish right away. So that's up to you again. So active and draft pretty much could be, they're a little redundant, but not necessarily, because active, you might not want it to be in draft mode, but it is also inactive, right? So like the question might be finished, like it's done. We aren't drafting it any longer, but we don't have it on our site. That's kind of one of those things. So, and then timestamp models dot date time field. So the date time field is pretty cool because it gets our date and time when this model is saved based on our database's settings for time. So our database's settings for time has to do with our actual time zone stuff. So this right here, right? So that's kind of that. So since it does that, we have a few preferences that we can put in here. So auto now add. So we can say true. I'll explain these in just a second. And then auto now equals to false. So auto now add means when this model is created, so when we actually create this question and save it in the database, then we note that time and add it into this timestamp field. Auto now means if it's ever saved, whenever it's saved, it adds that time. Where auto now add is only once. Auto now is every time it's saved. That's it. Okay, so now that we've got this, let's define a Unicode. And if you're on using 1.3, or excuse me, Python 3.3, you would do a string. It's the exact same thing, but you would just say string just like that. And then I'm just going to return self.text, and I'm going to just do up to 10. So we'll worry about this a little bit, but for now we've got this question. Perfect. So let's go into our admin.py, and I'm going to do from.models import question, and then I'll do admin.site.register question. And since we have created this model and we have it in the admin, we actually want to add it into the database. So let's go into our local.py, and now we'll add in question here. So we want to add it in alphabetical order here. So inside of my apps, I'll put question. And now we'll just do python manage.py, make migrations. No module named question. Made a little bit of a type error, or typing error, spelling error. It's questions, not question. So we make an S there. Make migrations. Now it works. So python manage.py, migrate. And now we've got these questions. So if we wanted to run the server, we could actually take a look at it in the admin, log in. We've got questions in here now, so if I add a question, I can say, hello there, is your name Justin? Something like that, and hit save. There, we now have this question, or ability to add questions in there. Cool, so that's a good start, but now we need to have answers, and answers being associated directly to that question. So that's something that we'll do in the next one. So if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. If you have questions as far as the general scope of the project, please hold those for a little bit because we are going to get into the matching algorithm, and that's when you'll probably want to have those questions again. All right, so we will see you in the next one.